Now, may the authors please come forward and take a seat. Kif, Lee, Lincoln, Gugu, Vinolia. So this book has been 5 years, more than 5 years in the works. In fact, 6. Some of the interviews go back as far as 2018. Right, Lincoln? I think 2018. Lee, yours was around 2018. Others are more recent. More than 5 years in the works. And very, very important lessons for future leaders, for anybody who looks to build a career. And that's really what we would like the authors to quickly share. One special moment from their story, from your life, from your career. And if I may start with Kif, you mentioned the turning point in your life was a shoebox with 100 applications. Can you tell us more?
Sure. So it was quite a while back. Back then, we actually spoke about it yesterday at another conference where we would buy the Star newspaper every Wednesday. I think it was a workplace to look for jobs. So looking for jobs is quite different back then. And when I moved to Johannesburg from Durban, I applied to 100 companies looking at a top ICT book. And back then, pretty much all of that was done on post. And I received quite a lot of rejection letters. And that was a turning point for me in terms of really understanding what I wanted to do. And I still, well, the box is gone today, but I can still remember the pain that I went through in terms of those rejection letters. And back then it was understanding, taking the pain and thinking about the opportunity and working through it in terms of thinking differently.
So Kif, today you're a global technology leader. What's your advice for the youth? What is maybe 1 or 2 success principles to build their career?
Look, I think it came out yesterday and it's come out today as well. I think the key thing for me is mindset. It's very easy to have a victim mindset. It's very easy to go down a rabbit hole and be negative, and we need to, because we're human beings. But at the same time, I think what's more important for me is having a growth mindset. Is taking problems and looking at opportunities, as we discussed today as well. So mindset for me is quite key. I think second to mindset is being aware of who you are and understanding your strengths and weaknesses. And the third thing is making sure you have the right counsel of people around you. So 95% of your success or failure is determined by the 5 closest people you have around you. And if you're conscious about that, you can seriously change the course and trajectory of your life.
Thank you. Now, Vinolia, you are the Group Chief People Officer at Adcoop, one of the biggest companies employing hundreds, if not thousands of people. So you're in a good position to talk about career advice. In your interview, when we asked you about the turning point, you said there was a turning point when you worked at Standard Bank, I believe, where you had a passion for technology. And can you tell us more? Technology and HR.
Yeah, so Nick, thank you. And I think thank you for the opportunity of collating this book. I think we need more initiatives like this to share experiences, because I think we have such a wealth of learning, but more especially we paid the school fees on experiences, failed, but we want to share so people don't repeat that failure. So thank you very much. Yes, turning points. I think what was very, very critical is back then in Standard Bank, they had traditional training and traditional ways of developing people. This was in the early 2000s. And although started off, I come from a digital tech background, so I was actually quite vocal about changing the traditional approach of training to a digital approach. And we went from classroom training to CD-ROMs, if anybody can remember those that you slot in. But it was really transformative. And I think for me that the turning point was, do we continue with the old, or do we try to be innovative and take big, bold decisions? And from there, I think it was, Standard Bank was a bit slow in terms of the adoption, but Discovery caught on it very quickly. And within less than a year and a half, I found myself in Discovery, and they were so innovative, and we really catapulted the digital distribution of learning skills and development, and that went on to become a global case study. So although I came from a traditional background my background is actually teaching. I started off as a maths and computer science teacher here in Johannesburg, and I only taught for a year and a half, and I also found the teaching facilities were very backward in their thinking, and Standard Bank embraced, let's explore this transformation into digital, and it's just grown. So I think a lot in my book and my learnings for the youth is take bold decisions. You will never know the success unless you try. Failure is actually a good thing, and we should celebrate it because there's an immense learning that comes out of failure. But yet, our human nature is to judge failure as negative. And I found some of my biggest learnings were failure. And I did not want people to make the same mistakes I did, so I'm happy to teach, mentor, coach, and say, be cautious of this. But I think our leadership, what we are looking for in the next generation is bold decisions, velocity, quick decisions, so we can see the impact, and learning. You know, I think in the past we came from a very orthodox approach of my learning must be kept to myself because we're in a competitive environment. Come on, there's so much of this pie that we can all share, so we don't have to be competitive. So I think that for me, it's almost about don't be afraid. Step out there, take those challenges. But when someone fails, the onlookers should actually embrace them rather than judge them.
Thank you. Now, at the previous Future of Leadership Summit, you and Kif shared the stage at the Workday panel, The Future of Work, and there was one insight that was really interesting, Vinolia. You spoke about the hidden skills, how data allows you to identify hidden skills of your employees.
Yes. Nick, you got a phenomenal memory. Yeah, so I think, although I've been in the HR space and I had a lot of, and in the book I also talk about turning points on do I want to stay or develop in the IT space or in the HR space. And I just found my personality didn't support the IT space. It was just too quiet and conserved for me. And in the HR space, I could actually touch more lives. And what we actually do and the power of technology in today's world, and I speak about digital and leaders embracing digital solutions because that is so critical. I do believe in my field from an HR perspective, the digital aspect sets me apart, and it helps, or I help organizations bring out, the insights around the unspoken. So we with the youth, we actually use Workday in my current employer, and I've actually got a record of implementing HRIS to bring insights around an organization's employee base, to identify talent, to be able to check data out on who's your high risk, who's available for your next promotion, etc. And there's some beautiful insights that we get, and I've helped organizations through the insights to proactively grow their internal talent base, identify risks, and address those risks proactively. And just a simple example is I was at Discovery at the time, and in the 2008 financial crisis was looming. None of us knew about it. We had digital online learning for all our employees at Discovery at the time. And we used to track what was the common courses. And suddenly there was a massive shift into budgeting, personal finance, etc. And I'm like, this is strange. Like, why are the bulk of our organizations doing this? And it actually gave us the insights that people were struggling financially, and we proactively put measures into place. And I think having that insights and the data helps organizations and leaders to proactively have the foresight to see what potentially is coming and plan for solutions to embrace it.
Thank you. Thanks, Vinolia. Gugu, you're the Executive Director for AULEX, the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls. Anybody remember, I think it was 2004, when AULEX was founded?
Yes.
Yes, you remember the day, the occasion, and Oprah is a great supporter of the country. Gugu, in your interview, you speak about the early days in your career. You speak about a moment in '96 when you worked for government and there was one interaction that sort of opened your eyes. Can you share that story?
I'm with Lincoln here. we worked together. I worked with Lincoln, and so I was one of those. We've been activists for a very long time, and I'm proud, to be part of the first bureaucrats in education at the time in '96 that pioneered a new education system. But being a young activist, and like many other young activists, I thought I would come in. I'm passionate about adult education. At that time, I thought I still think, it's tragic that we have so many adults who are not literate. And so one of the things that I specialized in was adult literacy and adult education. So I thought I'd come into government and put pieces in place and adults would learn everywhere. Government just looked at me, the bureaucracy just looked at me like this, like it's not changing. I got frustrated. I worked with an amazing mentor and supervisor, he's late now, Khetsili Hoko. And so at the end of the year, now I'm clever. I own all the time, I'm very smart. I was smart even then. So end of the year, we have a probation review. And they tell me they're extending my probation. Now, before then, I had worked for Transnet Training Board, and I was one of the managers there. A lot of it had to do with affirmative action, but, I didn't have to be in government. That was my point, and, So I said to Khetz, I'm going back to Transnet. In fact, they were prepared to double my salary, because you're going to extend my probation. And he said something. He said, no, I'll accept your resignation letter, but I'm going to tell you something. You're smart, but you're arrogant. The one thing, you want to change something, but you never took the time to understand how government works. So you want to change government, but you don't even know how government works. That has been the lesson that I've learned throughout my life, that the mistake that we make, Nick, is that we want to change things that we don't know.
Right.
Right, so you add pieces instead of understanding how did this collage come together so that if I move this piece, it will make the desired change. So everywhere that I've worked, I've taken time to understand how the system works.
Thank you.
And then changed what needed to be changed.
Thank you. And you are developing hundreds, if not thousands, of future leaders, future girl leaders, so thank you. Very valuable lessons. Lee, if we can walk back into the future, you grew up in Durban, Chatsworth, I believe, and in your interview you shared a very valuable lesson for any youth, for any upcoming leader, and that is, how do you discover your passion? You discovered your passion for technology at an early age, I believe, before digital really became a thing. Can you relate that story?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I grew up in a township called Chatsworth, and I actually remember when we were growing up, we all went to these, we call them government state-aided schools. And we didn't have much of anything, but I actually remember being quite smart at school. And then around probably standard 1, maybe 9 years old, the Teachers Training Center, I think it was called SAD2 back then, they had computers for the first time. And what they did was they arranged a minibus taxi to pick up all the smart kids in these different schools, and they bussed us over to the Teachers Training Center. And if you're a techie, you'd know a little turtle called Logo. And back then, you could tell this turtle to go left and go right. And for a fleeting moment, I saw this computer. And I went back to my reality back home. And it's interesting because if I fast forward then, the first time I actually touched a computer, I had my own computer, was at the end of university, even though I studied computer science. And what is interesting is we then jumped the story along. At some point, we had a public library in our area. Now, other than going to school and doing your homework, living in a strict home, we go to the library. So I'd probably read 5 books a week. And at some point, I read all the books, I reckon. And I discovered books on computers, right? So read these books, they sounded reasonable. And for a long time, I wrote pieces of code on paper, having never tested it. And then one year, the high school got computers. And my parents got permission for us to go actually touch them and play with the code. And that initial fleeting moment back at the Teachers Training Center gave me exposure to something that I followed I wholeheartedly made the choice that it wasn't to be computers that would change the world. It would be math that I needed to do. And as a youngster, all the way to high school, knowing that to break out of your circumstances in a tough, poor community, you'd have to stay on the straight and narrow. That led to me getting my scholarship, going to my dream university, and Anderson Consulting back in the day, it wasn't Accenture. They'd hired me before I finished university because I guess they saw something that they wanted as a graduate as well. So yeah, you don't know where you'll find inspiration. In the chapter I talk about, in a place like Chatsworth or any township, we lacked heroes. I can't think of a single hero that you say, I want to be like that person. And if you grew up before Mandela was released, you didn't know any heroes. All we knew was the cost of failure. We knew the cost, if you didn't do this, where you'd end up working, turning to drugs or alcohol. So what our parents did really well, and I must give testament to our parents, they kept us in the straight and narrow. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have seen that computer. I wouldn't be here today leading a large technology organization.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. So would you agree, when you unlock your passion, you unlock your career?
Absolutely. I think if you do find your passion, but it's important, the why I'm reflective is that your passion could change, right? After almost 2 decades being an Accenture person, running Accenture Digital for many years, I chose to leave and change my career fundamentally to head up TransUnion because my passion evolved. I realized, one of the gentlemen spoke about small businesses, and we speak about exclusion. Forget South Africa for a second. At the African continental level, Link and I are both solving the same problem, exclusion. There's 500 million people that are excluded. There's millions of SMEs that close down every day. My passion pivoted. So I've done a lot for me to grow as Lee Naik, the individual. But you don't maximize the impact. How do you create leverage? The choice to take on a new role was if I could help solve the problem, not by myself, but working with partners, working with academia, working with government, working with the World Bank like I do right now. And actually, if we can solve a problem that enables us to become the dream of every African child, and guess what? Then you're really creating leverage. So I'd say you could find your passion, but guess what? You could change your passion and even upgrade it to create more impact.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Lincoln, you are one of the top leadership voices in the country, on the continent. You're developing many, many future leaders, including, I believe, Lincoln Mali, right? Lincoln Mali Jr. And looking at that picture, I believe your son is performing in one of the top arenas in the US. So tell us a little bit more about that. And please, if you can also, you're a great advocate of leadership education. And in your interview, you touched on, I believe you attended 7 universities. And there was a special moment at, I believe, Harvard, where Professor Clayton Christensen did a talk on how to measure your life. So maybe I think that's important because career is one thing, but life and career are intertwined. If you can tell us a little bit about how future leaders should measure their life, and what's your experience from developing so many future leaders, including your son?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Thanks, everybody. When I was 18, I'd been expelled from school. I was in and out of jail. I was in and out of court. I was a group of very angry young people. All we wanted to do was to bring the apartheid system down and make the country ungovernable. And our lives were kind of dominated by strife and conflict, daily battles with the police, daily battles with the army. And I was in a leadership role then. And then I had this conversation with my father, who said, when are you going to go back to school? What do you mean, go back to school? Our demands have not been met. Our leaders are in jail. I had the whole speech. And then the guy said, no, I want you one day to go to Harvard. I'm like, where's that? We want guns. We want stones. And then he said to me, the biggest impact you can make in the future is not the size of the stone you can throw against the police. It's not the potency of the petrol bomb you can throw against the army. It's the quality of education that you get. It's the values that you imbibe, it's the principles you uphold, and it's the kind of person that you become in order to be the future that you want. And that was hard, because he brought to me an understanding at 18 years old that leadership is about responsibility. It was not the bravado of the fight. It was about the enormous responsibility to create something new, to lead people to something better than where they were. And that was hard. So now I had to go back to my other people and say, hey, maybe this thing we're doing must go back to school. And, with God's help, we got back to school. I was able to get my matric and study some more. And then studied in different universities, both here and abroad. And so here was I, who was almost a school dropout. Now I was in the best universities in the world. And then one day I landed at Harvard, what he said we must go to that time. He was no longer alive. But then there was this lecture by Professor Clay Christensen. And the theme of the lecture was, how will you measure your life? And he gave an example about people he studied with who were very successful, but they were lonely. They had a lot of money, but they had empty lives. They had no marriages. They had no relationship with their children. Then I had to examine myself, that I'd moved very fast. I was doing so well. I would sacrifice anything. People knew me as the most approachable person. But was I there for my family? The same way my father had been there for me. The answer was no. And I had to deeply reflect that my family was not asking me to work less harder. They were asking me to have time for them as well. So that when my wife at that time would say, I saw Peter Slebush and Sim Chabalala dropping off kids at school, I would say, the reason why Peter Slebush and Sim Chabalala are dropping off kids at school is because there are people like me who have to do the job. You rationalize bad behavior, right? And so I had to now relook at my life and say, in the remaining time in my life, what do I want to do with my life? And so the first thing I realized was my passion, back to Lee's thing, was leadership. And what made it that was that the version I used to see at business schools, in the private sector, in the public sector of leadership, was not how I was brought up. If I could ask any one of you to just think about your teachers, think about your family members who had the biggest influence on you. They may not have moved up the economic ladder, but when they see you, their face lights up because their passion was to produce people like you. That's when I realized that my calling was to produce other leaders. And so on these 13 years since that lecture, I then had to be re-involved with my children in a very different way. And the person who benefited probably the most was my son, because he's 18. And watching his journey has been incredible. And he's now studying in the States. And last night, he sent us a message to say he's been appointed a prefect at his school. Because he's going to follow his journey. But he's not alone. There are many young people in our corporates who are dying because we're suppressing them. There are many people in our organizations who are not succeeding because we're not giving them the opportunity. There are many young people who are in the dark like I was when I was 18. They can't see the light because we cannot provide it. So what I've devoted my time on is how can I get as many young people to reach their potential. And I'll just say the last thing. One of the things I saw was, 1976, there was the big riots. So people like Gugu will always have these anniversaries, and then they'll bring some guy from Soweto who was shot in the bum, and he repeats the same story on SABC. And I thought, but guys, guys, why are we keep on talking about where we come from? It's important. But it can't be the future. We should be telling our kids where we come from, but we should be helping our kids talk about where we're going. I see so many of our leaders are great at talking about the past. They don't have a vision of where we need to go. And so I started something last year where I would invite 16 top leaders to spend a day with young leaders with the Henley Business School. And the response from leaders has been incredible. So this year, 29th of June, we're having our second Youth Leadership Summit. And again, we're focusing on the future. Because if we can only just think about the past, just imagine you are in a passenger's seat and the driver, all they're doing is looking at the back. They're driving and they're going faster. It's okay to occasionally look, but you need to have a driver who's looking at the future, giving you a sense of where we're going and what you need to do to get there. And so that's my passion. So if my father and others had not given me an opportunity to see light, I wouldn't be here. If Lee had not been given an opportunity to see a computer, he wouldn't be here. If Gugu had not been given that conversation by, her manager, Mr. Lehoko, she wouldn't be here. And so it goes with all of us. If Discovery had not given you that opportunity to shine, what are we giving as opportunities for young people to shine? For me, that is my passion. How do we get young people? Because if we don't, they will have a revolution. So think of Lincoln when he was 18. I was a rebel rouser. But somebody showed me a different light. If you don't find those things, young people, as I was, will be disruptive. So that's the part that I think we have an opportunity. And I'll leave you maybe with a thought that some of you might remember Fees Must Fall. You remember Fees Must Fall. Where do you think those young people are? They're in our companies. It's going to take one spark in our companies for them to unleash their anger. But if we harness that energy, those insights, we can create some new and amazing things.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank all of you for the wonderful work you're doing. And Gugu, are you raising your hand?
No, I'm snapping.
You're snapping? Okay. So,
I work with young people, so when someone says something, snap.
thank you. So, thank you. Really inspiring and building the future. And I think that's what you'll find in the book. You'll find stories of inspiration. You'll find nuggets of wisdom. And again, I want to thank you. And I think that's a very important part of co-creating the future. Thank you very much. And before you leave, we'll have a quick tea and coffee and then a special stadium tour. Brett, are you still here? Brett, the CFO of Lions Cricket, has offered kindly to do, I believe, 30 minutes? 20 to 30 minute stadium tour. Remember, this is a venue of the 2027 Cricket World Cup. Yeah. So it might be worth your while just after tea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.